This is a how-to video on how to create a change impact analysis using Atio's change management methodology. Let's look at where we are in the project when we're doing a change impact analysis. We've usually done a case for change defining what is changing and the benefits, as well as a stakeholder assessment which identifies the stakeholders who will be impacted by the project, and at a 50,000 foot level, what's that impact? Now we're drilling down into change impacts, often by role, at least by department or group, before we do the change management strategy and detailed plan. Here's an example of a change impact analysis for a contract management project. What I like about this is it is simple. Someone can look at this and understand the roles that are involved and the details of the impact without getting into rows and rows of Excel. We'll get into that type of analysis shortly in this how-to video. For this table, you've got the stakeholders by role on the left-hand side, and this is just an excerpt of the stakeholders, not a comprehensive list. You've got the estimated number. It is still estimated. You should be closer to the actual number for each of the stakeholder groups, but it does not have to be the exact number. And you've got the description of the impact. You can see here we've kept it to the top highlights, or the top, say, don't go more than 5 impacts for each of the roles. That way it allows you to have a good discussion with the stakeholders that you're discussing the impacts with. In addition to the size of the impact, we've also added perception here, which tells you, generally speaking, for each of these roles, are they going to perceive this change as positive, negative, or neutrally. Whatever ranking scale that you use for size of impact, just put the details somewhere on the slide, because the most important part is it is a relative ranking. What you want to be able to do is, no matter which role you're looking at, you want to be able to look at high impacts or high impacts, whether it's the sales representatives or the procurement analysts. And if they're not, then the sales representatives should be, as they are here, moved to medium impacts. Last thing I want to point out is the information on the top left of this slide, which is how the information will be used. The reason that we put that up there is it's helpful for the stakeholders who we are discussing change impacts with to understand how they're going to be used. And in addition to identifying who and how people will be impacted, we also are looking for the greatest risks in terms of readiness or adoption, and it's used to inform the change management plan. This next example is another change impact analysis. It's a summary view for a program. And what it's showing you is, on the left-hand side, we've used 5 different dimensions or lenses in order to summarize the change impacts on 5 different projects, which are the 5 right-hand columns in the table. So we're able to look at each of the projects, or they could be processes or projects in terms of the columns. We're able to look at them from different perspectives or dimensions, give a definition to those dimensions, and now you can see an apples-to-apples comparison for each of these processes or projects. Drilling down on the summary that we just looked at, so if we're looking at one of the projects in those columns on the right-hand side from the prior slide, we're now looking at a summary for that project using the same dimensions, but now you can see we have about 5 or 6 as a maximum of key impacts for each of the dimensions for that project and the impact in the relative scale. So you can imagine, if we were going back to the prior slide, for each of those 5 projects, you would have 5 pages of drill down, one for each project, where you're now looking at a little bit more detail of the impacts for each of these projects using the dimensions outlined here or the dimensions that make sense for your project. Very easy way to keep a complicated program simple and have a good discussion about what the change impacts are. This slide shows a further drill down to the last slide that was at a summary level for a single project or process. And now we're looking at the Excel details that would support that summary. You can see here the first 2 columns summarize the change and give a little description of that change. And the 3rd column is the one that is most important, and that is, what does this mean for me? And what we're describing here is actually the change impact on the roles to the right of that impact. After that, we've got the magnitude of change for those roles and the perception, once again, for those roles. Now, the important thing to realize here is you might have the same summary and description of change like we do in rows 1 and 2, but depending on the role it's impacted, the what does this mean for me is going to be different, as well as the magnitude of change and the perception. These detailed Excels can be very helpful so we can keep track of our change impacts, but very difficult to validate with the client row by row as they're learning more information as the project moves along. Much better to validate the summary views with them and use that summary information to create your change management plan and your strategy. The last view I wanted to show you is a process view. So for projects that you're using a process taxonomy on, it's often nice to be able to show the extent of change by process, not just by role or department. Each time you slice and dice the impacts differently, it helps bring your stakeholders along and they have a better understanding of the extent of change, and it helps you as a change practitioner find the pieces that are either missing or incorrect. So in this case, you're using your detailed Excel and mapping it back to your process taxonomy and saying which process has a high, a medium, or a low amount of change. And that's it for the Change Impact Analysis How-To Guide brought to you by Atio's Change Management Community of Practice, created for you.